The lights glared hot against polished wood. Microphones angled forward like sentinels. Then his voice cut through. "I am not afraid." James Comey's words were meant to sound unbreakable, but the chamber heard something else. A crack disguised as courage. The silence that followed wasn't respect. It was suspense, because across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett was waiting. Calm, steady, and ready to strike. The chamber felt more like a theater than a hearing room. Cameras tightened, reporters scribbled, and every breath seemed scripted by anticipation. James Comey, tall and rigid, leaned into his microphone with the confidence of a man who had walked these corridors of power before. He framed himself as a survivor of storms, a man misunderstood, a man hunted, a man unwilling to bend. His declaration, "I am not afraid," echoed like a line rehearsed 100 times. It wasn't just testimony, it was performance. But every performance demands an audience. And this one was divided. Some leaned in with admiration, others with suspicion. His defenders saw defiance, his critics saw denial. The nation outside watched a man clinging to his legacy. Yet in that same chamber another figure sat poised. Jasmine Crockett. She did not fidget. She did not rehearse her breath. Her stillness was sharper than his bravado. Like a blade sheathed, she waited. The moment was cinematic. One man posturing, one woman calculating. Power against precision. And while Comey owned the microphone, Crockett owned the silence. It was the kind of silence that cuts deeper than sound. The kind that foreshadows a reckoning. This wasn't just any hearing. James Comey walked into it already scarred by history. Indicted days earlier for allegedly lying to Congress and obstructing justice, his return was more than symbolic. It was defiant. Headlines screamed his words, but behind them lay years of unresolved battles. The Russia probe, the Clinton email saga, the firing that shook Washington in 2017. Every ghost in his career seemed to be walking with him now. He spoke as if he were a man standing against a tidal wave of political vengeance. His allies nodded in rhythm. His critics sharpened pens. But his statement, "I am not afraid," didn't clear the air. It clouded it. Fearlessness, after all, is often claimed when fear is most present. And that contradiction hung like smoke in the chamber. Then, slowly, the camera panned to Jasmine Crockett. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her lips didn't move. That quiet observation was more damning than any verbal blow. While Comey painted himself as a victim of political warfare, Crockett prepared to show he was something else, an architect of his own undoing. The tension thickened, and in that moment the story stopped being about what Comey said, and started being about what Crockett would do. "I am not afraid." 3 words, one declaration, but 1,000 interpretations. They rang through the room like a gavel strike, firm, final, unbending. The former FBI director delivered them with measured calm, his chin lifted, as though daring the world to doubt his resilience. Cameras zoomed in, reporters scribbled, and for a split second it looked as if he had seized control of the narrative. But then came the silence. Not applause, not affirmation, just silence. It was thick, uncomfortable, the kind of silence that stretches and breaks the illusion of certainty. People exchanged glances. Was it courage, or was it bluff? Was it resilience, or was it rehearsed theater? Jasmine Crockett leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly before her. She didn't interrupt. She didn't challenge yet. She let the silence do its work. For in silence, words can collapse under their own weight. And Comey's words began to sag. It was a masterclass in timing. Crockett understood that in politics, sometimes the deadliest strike is not immediate. Sometimes it is the pause, the look, the space between breaths. And so while Comey declared fearlessness, the audience began to wonder, why did he need to declare it at all? She moved with purpose but not with noise. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice to meet Comey's declaration. Instead, she wielded restraint like a weapon. Her first words weren't fire but clarity. "What exactly are you not afraid of? The truth?" The room reacted before Comey could. Eyebrows lifted. A few chuckles escaped the press bench. That question cut deeper than a shouted accusation. It reframed the entire declaration. Fearlessness now sounded like defensiveness. Bravery now looked like denial. Crockett leaned into the microphone, her tone measured, her gaze unshaken. She didn't mimic his performance, she dismantled it. While Comey's words were broad strokes of defiance, hers were surgical. She asked not about politics, not about persecution, but about accountability. And accountability is the one thing that slogans cannot shield. Comey cleared his throat. He adjusted his papers. His eyes flicked downward. For a man claiming fearlessness, he suddenly looked uneasy. The silence after her question wasn't his anymore. It was hers. She had seized it. That shift was subtle but seismic. In that instant, the roles reversed. The towering former FBI director was no longer commanding the stage. The Congresswoman from Texas was, and with each passing second, the gap between claim and truth widened. To understand why this clash mattered, you had to rewind. James Comey's career was built on decisions that divided America. The announcement on Hillary Clinton's emails just days before the 2016 election, the launching of Crossfire Hurricane, the investigation into Russian interference, his firing by Donald Trump that ignited a constitutional firestorm. Each chapter left scars, each choice carved into his reputation. When he now said, "I am not afraid," it wasn't just about his indictment, it was about all of it. The ghosts of those years, the doubts that never settled. He wanted the moment to sound like redemption. But Crockett's eyes told another story. This wasn't a cleansing. It was a reckoning. She reminded the chamber of those controversies, not by shouting but by threading them together like beads on a wire. Each one tightened the noose. Each one painted a picture of a man not fearless, but cornered. The chamber felt it. Reporters scribbled harder. Some members leaned back, arms crossed, sensing where this was going. Crockett wasn't just challenging his quote, she was challenging his history. And in politics, history always walks beside you. The silence, the questions, the context, all of it converged. And the reckoning had only begun. The hush that followed James Comey's words lingered like smoke after a firework. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of doubt. Every camera froze. Every notepad stopped scratching. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than the man who had just claimed, "I am not afraid." Jasmine Crockett. Let that silence breathe. She didn't break it with a rush of words. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his. She allowed the audience, both in the chamber and at home, to sit with the contradiction. Because silence, when used deliberately, becomes its own kind of cross-examination. Comey shuffled his notes, coughed once, adjusted his tie. Small gestures, but enough to betray that his armor was cracking. Fearlessness shouldn't need performance. Yet his performance was all too visible. Crockett finally spoke, but with surgical precision. Fearlessness is proven, not declared. The phrase hung in the air, clean and sharp. It cut through the fog of Comey's bravado. And in that moment, the silence no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. The reporters in the back scribbled again. The narrative had shifted. Comey's declaration was now an open question, and Crockett held the answer. The weight of the moment was heavy, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in theater. She was interested in accountability. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice clear and unflinching. "You've told the American people you're not afraid. But this indictment, obstruction of justice, false statements to Congress, isn't about fear. It's about truth. Are you afraid of that?" The room bristled. Even supporters who had cheered Comey's defiance shifted uneasily. These were not partisan talking points. They were the hard facts of the charges. Each allegation stacked like bricks, building a wall too high to ignore. Comey straightened his posture, his face tightening. He spoke of politics, of vendettas, of a justice system weaponized against him. But Crockett's question lingered in the air like a bell still ringing. Was he afraid of the truth? The camera crews zoomed in. They knew this was the clip that would define the day. Crockett's strategy wasn't volume, it was precision. She wasn't just questioning his words, she was questioning his foundation. And in doing so, she reminded the nation that beyond slogans and sound bites, there are facts. And facts, unlike performances, do not bend easily. The hearing was no longer about a single quote. Jasmine Crockett turned the lens back on James Comey's record, forcing him to relive the choices that had defined, and in many ways doomed, his legacy. "Director Comey," she began, her tone almost disarmingly calm, "you wrote memos. You leaked them. You testified, but somehow every time clarity turned into confusion. Why so many contradictions?" Her words were not shouted, but they struck with the force of a hammer. She didn't accuse outright. She dissected. She placed Comey's own history under the microscope and invited the nation to look with her. Comey responded with layered explanations, weaving in context, legal nuance, procedural complexity. But Crockett refused to drown in his sea of words. She interrupted with a scalpel's edge. "Complexity doesn't erase contradictions. The public deserves clarity." The cameras caught his pause. Just a beat too long. His practiced calm flickered. The room noticed, and for the first time his famous composure looked less like strength and more like strain. Crockett smiled faintly, not with triumph, but with certainty. She knew that every moment he spent justifying himself, every tangled explanation, only amplified her point. He wasn't fearless. He was cornered. And cornered men don't need slogans. They need answers. "This is not just about you," Jasmine Crockett declared, her voice gaining a new gravity. "This is about trust. In the FBI, in Congress, in the very institutions that hold this democracy together." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. The chamber stilled. Crockett had widened the battlefield. No longer was this a clash of personalities. It was about the health of the system itself. She reminded everyone that when institutions lose credibility, it isn't political elites who suffer first. It's ordinary Americans, families, workers, citizens, who rely on fairness in law enforcement and integrity in government. "When leaders fail," she pressed, "the people pay the price." Comey bristled. He tried to steer the conversation back to his personal defense, framing himself as a victim of vendetta. But Crockett refused to narrow the lens again. She reminded the chamber that accountability is bigger than one man's career. It is the lifeline of democracy. The audience at home didn't just hear her words, they felt them. She was speaking not only as a congresswoman, but as a citizen demanding that institutions serve the people, not shield the powerful. And in that framing, Comey's personal defiance suddenly looked small. Then came the moment that punctured the entire performance. Crockett leaned in, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. "Mr. Comey," she said, "what are you really afraid of? Consequences or exposure?" The question landed like thunder. It wasn't rhetorical. It demanded an answer. And yet the silence afterward was louder than any reply. Comey blinked. His lips parted, then closed. He glanced at his notes but found no prepared script. Because this wasn't a question about process or precedent. It was about truth. And truth has no footnotes. The room felt the shift. Members looked from him to her, sensing the imbalance. The once commanding figure at the microphone now seemed smaller. His declaration, "I am not afraid," was unraveling in real time. He finally stammered about politics, about the dangers of precedent, about standing firm, but his words sounded rehearsed. Crockett's question still hung unanswered in the air. Consequences or exposure? Which one gnawed at him in the quiet of the night? The tension reached beyond the chamber. Viewers at home, scrolling clips, shared the moment in real time. This was the clip, the soundbite, the line that would echo. Crockett had done more than challenge his words. She had cornered his truth. James Comey tried to regain ground. He straightened, his voice firmer now, weaving through legal precedents, complex regulations, and the supposed checks and balances that shaped his decisions. To his supporters, it sounded authoritative. To the rest of the room, it sounded evasive. Jasmine Crockett let him finish, then tilted her head slightly. Her tone was calm, almost conversational. "You see," she said, "the American people don't want labyrinths of legal talk. They want honesty, clarity, simplicity. If you are truly unafraid, why hide behind complexity?" The room froze again. This wasn't just debate. It was dissection. Comey's web of explanations had become his cage, and Crockett was pointing it out with surgical ease. The cameras cut between them. His rigid posture, her unflinching gaze. The energy shifted again. His answers, meant to restore authority, instead amplified the perception that he was cornered. Crockett pressed once more. So which is it? Clarity or cover? Her words echoed across the chamber, leaving him no space to retreat. At that moment, the once commanding former FBI director was not a shield of law. He was a man exposed. And in the theater of politics, exposure often speaks louder than testimony. The chamber wasn't just filled with lawmakers. It was filled with a silent jury, reporters, aides, staffers, and millions of viewers watching through screens across America. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett spoke to all of them. Her cadence slowed, her eyes sweeping across the room. This isn't about me. It isn't about you. It's about every American who deserves leaders who answer plainly, without fear or disguise. The audience leaned in. Even those accustomed to political theater felt the weight of her words. She wasn't grandstanding. She was channeling the collective frustration of a public tired of double talk. Comey tried to interject, but his words drowned under the growing hum of keyboards and the rapid fire of cameras clicking. The reporters knew. Crockett had seized not just the stage but the narrative. On social media, clips of her words began trending almost instantly. Hashtags formed, phrases repeated. Viewers at home weren't just spectators anymore. They were participants, amplifying the moment. Comey looked uneasy, aware that this wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a national broadcast, and the crowd, inside and outside the chamber, was no longer with him. It was with her. Consequences. The word itself lingered like a shadow in the chamber. Jasmine Crockett brought it front and center. Mr. Comey, if these charges lead to conviction, it won't just be about you. It will shape how future leaders are held accountable. The stakes are bigger than one man. Her voice was steady, her tone deliberate. She wasn't threatening him. She was reminding everyone of the ripple effects. A conviction could redefine institutional trust, set precedents, and signal to every office holder that no one, no matter how high, is above the law. Comey shifted uneasily. He spoke of due process, of fairness, of letting the courts decide. But Crockett pressed, "And yet you speak as if this is personal vengeance. Why? If you believe in the system, why fear its judgment?" The audience held their breath. The power of her framing was undeniable. This wasn't just a personal reckoning. It was a national one. For every viewer at home, it felt less like a hearing and more like a mirror held up to the state of democracy itself. The weight wasn't only on Comey's shoulders. It was on the system, and Crockett's voice carried that truth for all to hear. Some in the chamber whispered that Crockett was being too harsh, too direct, too unyielding toward a former FBI director. Respect, they argued, should temper her tone. But Crockett anticipated that line of criticism, and she was ready. Respect, she said firmly, is not immunity. Respect is earned through accountability. And when accountability fails, respect collapses with it. The line hit like a hammer. It reframed the entire argument. She wasn't attacking the man. She was defending the principle. And in defending principle, she stood taller than any protocol of deference. Comey blinked hard, his jaw tightening. He had built a career on the aura of integrity, on the assumption that his title shielded him. But Crockett shattered that illusion in real time. Her words resonated outside the chamber, too. On live stream chats and Twitter feeds, people echoed her sentiment. Respect without accountability is worthless. The public found in her a voice that mirrored their own anger at leaders who seem untouchable. In that moment, intimidation flipped. It was no longer her challenging a powerful figure. It was the powerful figure struggling under the weight of her questions. Crockett had inverted the dynamic, and the chamber felt it. Then Crockett shifted gears. Her voice softened, her cadence slowed. "Let's not forget," she said, "this is not just about politics or power. It's about people." She spoke of citizens who placed trust in institutions, expecting fairness but receiving confusion. of families who watched scandals unfold year after year and wondered whether truth ever truly mattered in Washington, of ordinary Americans who just wanted honesty, not spectacle. Every time trust is broken here, she continued, it ripples outward, into communities, into homes, into the very soul of democracy. When leaders play games with the truth, it's not headlines that suffer, it's people. The chamber quieted again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't tense, it was reflective. Crockett wasn't aiming for applause. She was aiming for connection. Comey shifted, clearly uncomfortable. His declaration of fearlessness looked smaller, almost self-centered, against the backdrop of her broader appeal. She had pulled the focus away from him and onto the people he once served. And in that pivot, she reminded everyone watching that accountability is not abstract. It is human, it is personal, it is necessary, and no proclamation of fearlessness can outweigh the lived cost of broken trust. The pace of the hearing shifted. No longer was this a slow duel of words. It became a rapid exchange, sharp and unrelenting. Jasmine Crockett pressed harder, stacking contradictions like building blocks, each one higher than the last. She cited past testimony, conflicting statements, shifting stories. Each detail tightened the noose. Comey tried to parry, his voice quickening, his words tumbling. He leaned into technicalities, into legal nuance, but the speed betrayed him. The more he spoke, the less he controlled the moment. He was no longer directing the narrative, he was reacting to hers. Crockett leaned in. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "You say you're not afraid. Then stop dodging. Answer plainly." The line struck like a blade. The audience felt it. Viewers at home replayed it. The former FBI director, once a towering figure in American law enforcement, looked diminished. The bravado of "I am not afraid" now seemed brittle under the weight of her relentless clarity. The chamber buzzed. Reporters typed furiously. This wasn't just debate anymore. It was collapse, and Crockett, with surgical precision, was orchestrating it. The final strike didn't come as a roar. It came as a whisper sharpened into steel. Jasmine Crockett looked him dead in the eye and asked, "You said you're unafraid. But are you unafraid of me?" The question cut through the air like thunder in still skies. The room gasped audibly. Even the seasoned journalists blinked in disbelief. This wasn't just political theater. It was a dismantling. Comey froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. He adjusted his tie, buying seconds he didn't have. His silence was louder than any defense. For a man who prided himself on composure, that pause was fatal. Crockett leaned back slowly, her expression steady. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She let the silence do the victory for her. The cameras zoomed in on his face. Flushed, stiff, cornered. The shift was unmistakable. Comey had begun the day declaring strength. But by the end, Crockett's calm question had stripped away the veneer. The declaration of fearlessness now lay in ruins. The chamber knew it. The nation watching knew it. Crockett had not just challenged his words. She had claimed the moment, and won. The air in the chamber seemed different after that. Conversations whispered softer. Reporters scribbled with a new urgency. And even Comey's allies looked uneasy. The former FBI director sat rigid. But the damage had been done. His declaration no longer defined the day. Crockett's dismantling did. Clips spread like wildfire online. Headlines shifted from Comey's defiance to Crockett's precision. Crockett shuts down Comey trended before the hearing even ended. For viewers, the victory wasn't just hers, it was theirs. She had said what so many wanted to hear, that titles don't shield you from the truth. Inside the chamber, silence gave way to murmurs. Some members applauded quietly. Others exchanged glances of disbelief. The balance of power had tilted, and everyone could feel it. Crockett rose, gathering her notes calmly. She didn't look around for praise. She didn't wave for cameras. Her demeanor was as sharp as when she had started. For her, this wasn't performance. It was principle. And as Comey remained seated, his once commanding presence now subdued, the echoes of her words lingered. Fearlessness, it turned out, wasn't declared. It was tested, and he had failed the test. Jasmine Crockett's closing words weren't aimed at Comey anymore. They were aimed at the nation. This hearing isn't about one man. It's about whether we can still demand accountability in a democracy. Her tone softened, her words measured. She spoke directly to Americans watching at home, the families at their dinner tables, the workers scrolling through headlines, the young people questioning whether truth still mattered in politics. When leaders say they're unafraid, but avoid accountability, that's not courage. That's evasion. True courage is facing the truth, even when it's hard. And if our institutions are to survive, then truth must never be optional. The chamber hushed again, this time in reflection. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny the clarity of her framing. She had transcended the partisan clash. She had made it about democracy itself. For viewers, it wasn't just a takedown. It was a reminder, a warning, a call. Crockett wasn't celebrating victory. She was demanding vigilance. If you believe in holding leaders accountable, she added, tap that like button and subscribe to Native US. This fight isn't over, and neither are we. And with that, she turned her fire into fuel for a movement. The hearing closed, but the resonance continued. Reporters rushed to file stories. Commentators debated what it meant for Comey's case, for the credibility of the FBI, for the broader battle over truth in Washington. But to millions of Americans, one takeaway stood above all. Jasmine Crockett had silenced a declaration with accountability. Her final words served not as an end, but as a beginning. This fight doesn't stop here. It continues in every hearing, every election, every voice that refuses to be silenced. Viewers at home felt included in that fight. She looked into the camera as though speaking directly to them. Tell us in the comments, do you think Comey is truly unafraid or just cornered? And don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the next big moment in this fight for truth. The rhetoric was sharp, but the invitation was personal. She wasn't lecturing. She was building a community. And in the era of digital politics, that community mattered as much as the chamber itself. The gavel fell. The lights dimmed, but Crockett's victory was already sealed. Not just in Washington, but in the living rooms of America. The cameras faded, but the moment endured. James Comey entered declaring defiance. I am not afraid. He left diminished, his words hollowed by the weight of Jasmine Crockett's relentless clarity. She hadn't shouted him down. She hadn't grandstanded. She had done something far more powerful. She had forced truth to stand taller than title. This wasn't just a victory in one chamber. It was a lesson in democracy, that accountability is not optional and that courage is proven, not proclaimed. Crockett reminded America that leaders are not measured by their declarations, but by their willingness to face scrutiny. In the clash of power and principle, it was principle that won, and for a democracy still finding its footing, that victory mattered. The echoes of it will outlast the hearing.